Welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the Adorium Conversations podcast series. My name's Marcus Watson and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Adorium. Adorium is a global friendship network of business leaders, investors, entrepreneurs and philanthropists. We believe in human relationships in a disintermediated world. We create events in London, Zurich and many other cities around the world to have meaningful discussions and talk about important issues. Welcome everyone, and welcome Dean Stott, who's our guest today. It's an honour and an absolute pleasure to have Dean on the Adorium Conversations podcast. Dean's actually spoken at one of our events, and everybody who was there, all our members and our community who came to that, absolutely loved it. Dean's a friend of Adorium's. He's a former British Special Forces soldier who left the military after suffering a severe knee injury in what I think was a high altitude parachute jump, wasn't it, Dean, in 2011. Dean then established a distinguished career in private security. However, in 2016, he decided that he was ready for another challenge. And as you do, he began training to cycle the longest motorable road in the world, the Pan American Highway, which is a 14,000 mile route, which I think is like cycling to Sydney and then another 4,000 miles or something, I think he told me.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because of the curvature of the earth. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dean cycled through some of the most dangerous countries in the world in doing that. And Dean's always on the lookout for a challenge. And he'll come on and tell us later in the conversation about what his next challenge is. And Dean's also the best-selling author. He wrote this book, Dean Stott Relentless, which is an awesome book, which kind of tells his story. So, welcome, Dean. Up there in whereabouts are you at the minute?
In sunny Aberdeen, yeah.
Yeah, and it is sunny, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I think up here we're used to being in isolation.
Yeah. Good. So Dean, I mean, it's great to have you on the podcast. I mean, as we discussed when you spoke at an event, business people, which is essentially what the Adorium kind of network is. I mean, it's business leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, philanthropists. You know, we're kind of less interested in media and entertainment personalities, and much more interested in military people and people who have achieved kind of incredible feats, and sports people as well.
Yeah.
And I think the interest is in the mindset, because as business people, you go through ups and downs, and it's the resilience that you have, and that kind of relentless attitude that eventually gets you to where you want to be, and it's that kind of mindset that I'd love to kind of talk to you a bit about today. But would you mind kind of starting off by giving us some of your kind of background from when you were a kid? I mean, obviously I know it from having read the book, but
yeah.
I mean, you've had a pretty interesting kind of life, starting from when you were a kid. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind starting at the beginning and kind of talking us through
no worries,
how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I was born into a military family. My father was in the military. Both my grandparents were in the military. I was born in Swindon, but actually, due to my family rotating every 3 years, I never really settled down in any specific places. In 1985, I was about eight years old. My parents decided to split up. My mum's from Manchester. My father's from Scotland, actually. And my mum took me and my two sisters back home to Manchester. And because she spent so long away from the city, to get onto the housing schemes, we had to go into a homeless home in Moss Side, which in the middle of the 80s was the roughest estate
I remember.
in the UK. So from an early age, I was fighting in the playgrounds. Me and my sisters were the only white children in the school. Got suspended from that school at an early age, and then moved on to another school in Fallowfield, which is opposite the old main road for the old Man City fans that are amongst us. And so from an early age, I was learning the hard way. I didn't grow up. I got sort of dragged up, as they said. But my father actually got custody of me and my two sisters 2 years later, and we moved back down to Aldershot, which was the home of the British Army. So I was immersed in that whole environment, but it was never forced upon me from my family to pursue a career in the military myself. I always actually wanted to be a fireman, and I finished school and went on to college, and I have a passion for the water, which we'll talk about later on in the podcast. You know, I've been surfing since a young age, and so me and my friends went to Newquay for the summer, and for 2 weeks. And long before mobile phones, I met a young guy in the water called Jan, a Norwegian, serve his evening meal and surf all day. And I thought, well, perfect. At the age of 16, you know, I could do that. It took £30 home each day, £10 for the hostel, and £20 in his pocket. So 2 weeks later, my father came to pick me and my friends up. My friends were more interested in girls at that time in nightclubs, and I wasn't there when my father picked me up. And you know, my friend said, well, he's staying. He's staying in Newquay. He's a waiter now. So my father took them away. Even 6 months later, came back to Newquay looking for me, long before mobile phones, and found me. And he said, look, you've thrown away your education. What are you going to do now? And I said, well, I'll join the army. And I was about 5'7" and 9.5 stone, soaking wet through. And my father told me I'd last 2 minutes. Probably not the motivational words I'd expected from him, but a bit of a fire in my belly. And I thought, well, I'll prove you wrong. And I continued, went to the careers office, joined the military. My father was in the Royal Engineers, and he thought I would spend minimum time in the military community. So whilst you're there, go get as much as you can from the military as possible, get a trade. So I joined the Royal Engineers, and by the age of 21, and I joined the army at 17 and a half, by the age of 21, I was a para commando diver and PTI. I'd done every arduous course up to that point that the core of the engineers could offer me. The only next step really was UK Special Forces. I was lucky to spend 8 years with 5-9 Commando in North Devon, so I wasn't far from the beaches of Saunton Sands and Braunton to keep my surfing up. But for me, I wanted to push myself even further. So I decided to go for UK Special Forces selection. Normally, the guys in the army would go, the normal transition is to the Special Air Service. Having spent 8 years in Free Commander Brigade and also being the senior diving instructor at the time, I was more attracted to that of the Special Boat Service. And actually both courses are mirrored. They do the courses together. There is no separation. So much to the disgust of my friends from the SAS, I applied for the Special Boat Service, and 6 months later, we thankfully passed the course. And again, I think I opened the doors there slightly. Now 15% of the Special Boat Service are from the...
So you were the first one, were you, to go from the army?
One of the first ones, yeah. We were almost like the guinea pigs, you know, so we... I remember going down there, and, you know, our military numbers are very different from theirs. They had a computer pay system, which was already working in the Navy, but it wasn't working in the Army. So for me to collect my Special Forces pay, I had to go to the local Army unit, to the cash office, to collect that each month. So there was a lot of teething problems in the early stages, which they've now ironed out. But yeah, very much one of the first to take that leap.
We know a lot of, you know, ultra net worth business leaders and stuff, and very often they have security, and, you know, they do tend to be ex-Special Forces guys. So I've met a lot of them, or, you know, several of them in the past, and they're guys of my kind of size. I mean, they're bigger than me in terms of build, like you, but they're not the kind of massive guys that you would expect.
No, the massive guys tend to be more your celebrity profiles. It's an image. Yeah. Actually, where the Special Forces guys are good, we're very non-intrusive. You know, we can blend into an environment. They always say about being the grey man on the course, not standing out, and that's what we do. You know, I hear comments that we're like the thinking soldiers. We're there assessing the situation, and it's funny actually. When I went from the military to the private security sector, you've gone from being, you know, known as potentially some of the bravest people in the world to being the biggest cowards, because any sort of scenarios or situations you see, you just need to avoid it, and that's a good security operator, is being able to identify those signs early and going around it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what age are you now then? When you've been through selection, you're now in the Special Forces.
Yeah, so I did it quite late. I was at 28 years old when I joined the Special Forces, and I joined in 2005, and it was at a time on the height of the war on terror. You know, we were in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan. I was very fortunate to do numerous operations there, do hostage rescues, you know, operational jump in. I was literally ticking all the boxes, which, you know, depends when you join the military. Like my father before me, he joined at a period where there wasn't really any sort of conflicts. There was the Falklands War, but it was like Northern Ireland. Whereas this period in our lives, anyone who joined the military would be out there on operations. So I was literally ticking all the boxes. And as I say, these kids, is it Call of Duty? I was living and breathing that lifestyle. And for me, I was at the pinnacle of my career. I don't get too involved in the politics and why we're there. I'm just there with my buddies and just look after each other, and we have an objective.
And can you tell me when you're in these kind of very dangerous kind of situations, which, you know, I think we're all thankful that there are people like you who are willing to go and do that, essentially put your lives on the line. I mean, are you scared, or have you been trained, or have you trained yourself to, because I can imagine, you know, if you're too scared, you're not going to be able to think straight. But at the same time, I guess you have to be very aware of what's going on in order to kind of, you know, stay out of too much trouble.
Yeah, I think what it is, I think anyone who says they're not scared is a liar. You know, you see these celebrities on telly like that, and, you know, that's just an outlier. You need to have an element of fear, but you need to be able to manage it. And for us, because we train and train and train, and then we rehearse, and then when we've got it, we then do it again. So that when we're actually on the ground or on operations, whatever we're doing at that time, when we're going through the door or jumping out the plane, it's second nature to us. You know, we're not pausing. We know what we're doing next. And actually, when it then, as I say, goes live, you know, it just becomes natural. Everything seems to slow down, but you trust your plan, and you trust the equipment and those around you. It's a bit like I was chatting to some guys from the England rugby team. That when they're in their clubs, their normal clubs, obviously they're probably some of the better players, and the rest of the team are relying on them. Whereas when you're in a team like this, you know that these people have got your back, and they're doing their job correctly as well. You don't need to check up on them. And that's what it is in the Special Forces. You've got those like-minded individuals that you know they're doing their job to the best that they can do.
Yeah, operating at a high level.
At a high level. And, you know, I was guest speaking once, and one of the England rugby guys was talking about how in, you know, the World Cup 2003 squad, how they rehearsed 100 times to get those 1% margins. And then I came on and I was talking about how we rehearse. And then once we've got it, we just keep going. And I said, because, you know, if we make a mistake, we don't lose 5 points, we lose lives. And that's the reality of it, is that we need to be on the top of our game, because any sort of error costs lives, and whether it's the lives of your team or lives of potential hostages you're trying to rescue.
So a big part of the training is drilling, is just doing it time and time again, so it becomes kind of second nature.
Becomes second nature. I mean, also look at options as well, you know, because things never go to plan. And we'll probably talk about that on my bike ride as well. You know, we always say best plan doesn't survive first contact. You know, we didn't expect the enemy to shoot back. So what we do is, because we've rehearsed it, and we've also done it in various scenarios, that when it comes to the day of the race, as long as you've got the basics right, you can adapt that to the situation on the ground. And I think that's what we're quite good at in the military, is being able to react to the situation on the ground, because things don't ever go to plan. You have a start point, you have an objective. It's just how you get there.
So you're now 28. You've passed Special Forces. So you're now going out and doing your thing. And I guess, you know, experiencing some amazing things, some scary things, but, you know, some amazing things.
Yeah, that's it. You know, it's and it's very high octane lifestyle with the military. They literally, you know what you're doing for the next 2 years, and there is hardly any gaps. For someone like me, and maybe I noticed with a lot of your entrepreneurs in the Dorium, they're very, very busy, and I think you make good Special Forces operators. You enjoy that environment because you are busy. But, you know, you get to see the world. You know, there's an old military habit: join the army, see the world sort of sketch. But for me, it was understanding the cultures as well. You're very much driven these days with media, what you see on telly. Everyone's very quick to tarnish, for example, the Muslim community. But actually, we worked alongside the locals as well and got to respect them and them respect us as well. So that was a real eye opener for me, and that's what I probably wouldn't get if I was in the Green Army. You can only get that within the Special Forces community. You'd be embedded with the locals. So that was a real eye opener to me as well. And understanding the history as well, you know, especially for likes of Afghanistan, the Afghans didn't like the Brits as much as the Americans, because we've been there 3 times now.
How did you kind of look after yourself from a health and wellness perspective then, when you're kind of operating at such a high level where kind of physically and mentally you've got to be absolutely on your game? I mean, what did you do to stay fit? What kind of food did you eat? Did you think about nutrition at all?
No, at that period. So back in the normal army, you know, it's great because you have gyms on camp. You can do extra PT yourself, but you'd have scheduled training anyway. So that was built into your plan. When you went to Special Forces, because you were so busy, we really struggled to get our own personal training in. But because we always trained for real, that itself was physically demanding. Whether you're, you know, diving 5 kilometers towards an oil rig or a ship, you know, that itself is pushing on the body. So it was just built into what we do already, day in, day out. I mean, any sort of downtime, the last thing you'd want to do was go to go to the gym. But because of the weight of the equipment that we're doing and the you know, the high octane level that we were performing, we were keeping fit anyway. Someone gave me an analogy that the equivalent of a parachute jump, you know, exiting an aircraft is equivalent of running a London Marathon, because of the level of adrenaline on the body, and then coming down. So we used to do 2 to 3, you know, jumps a day and be absolutely shattered and wonder why, you know, because physically we haven't done much. We've just exited the aircraft and pulled a few toggles and headed towards the DZ. But it's the effect that it has on the body. I know, having spoken to a few of my colleagues who are still in, that they are now addressing the nutrition aspect. You know, for us, it was literally you grab a lunchbox from the canteen, and you'd have a frozen Cornish pasty or sausage roll, maybe an apple, and a packet of crisps. But I think there's a lot of science now involved in it, and what we are doing, or what they are doing now, is learning how to look after themselves, because of injuries. We can't afford to get injured. You know, naturally you're losing guys. Any guys are getting killed. You get your injuries anyway. Guys retiring. It's very difficult to stay on top of those numbers. So guys are now doing a lot of yoga and stretching, Pilates and things like that. And these are lessons they're learning from their American counterparts in the Navy SEALs and Delta Force. And so along with that, you know, nutrition's a key one, and I know that it's implementing that now into their routine, be it through vitamins.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on and talk about you know, the other challenges that you've done, and how the kind of what kind of nutrition and other exercises and stuff you did to get through that. So I mean, I guess you can't talk about any of the operations. So can you tell us about, you know, the jump and what happened then, because that effectively ended your military career, didn't it?
That's it, yeah. So we were due to deploy on another trip to Afghanistan, and it was about 2 weeks before the deployment date, and we were out in Oman doing pre-deployment training, and I was doing a hey-ho jump. It's called a high altitude, high opening jump. So unlike free falling, where you're free of any wires, when you exit the aircraft, you're attached to the aircraft. And then once it pulls to an extent, it will open the parachute for you. As I exit, it was almost like a freak accident. My leg had got caught up in the line above my head. So I was frantically trying to kick it out in time before the parachute went taut and open, because it could potentially rip my leg off. And I couldn't release it in time. My leg was pulled up over my head and to the right, but thankfully it did get released. Straight away, that sharp pain, you know, I knew there was a problem. I started vomiting in the air, and that where you do your hey-ho jump, you're at 15,000 feet, so you're on the limits of oxygen, so it's quite thin up there. So I was also drifting in and out of consciousness, trying to stay with the rest of the team. And the team are unaware that there's a situation at this point either, because they've not seen the problem. And on a hey-ho jump, you can travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes in the air to the DZ. And so that was my first challenge, is how was I going to land this without actually damaging the good leg? I got to the DZ and I noticed the other parachutists approaches into the wind, and I managed to land one-legged. It was a perfect landing, but unfortunately the damage sustained on the exit ended my career. So I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus all within the knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep, and all the supporting muscles that went with it. So thankfully, my leg wasn't ripped off. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this podcast. But unfortunately, it was the end of my career at that point.
And where did this happen? Was this in the Sahara? Was it?
No, this was in Oman. This is in Oman.
Okay, in Oman, yeah.
Yeah, and to add to the issue is it was the same time as, remember the volcanic ash from the Iceland?
Yeah, no, I remember it well. Yeah.
So all the aircraft were grounded, so they couldn't get an Aeromed out to me. So I was literally, for the first 4 weeks, because that's the crucial recovery period, it's straight after the incident, and so I was just put in a hotel with painkillers for 5 weeks until I could get a flight.
So
out.
no doctor there or anything.
We went to the MRI scan, got an MRI scan to confirm that, ligament damage, but no, nothing they can do for me until I got back to UK, and that then started a spiral of errors within the medical system in the military. But hey.
So that's it. At that point, you kind of out of the military. You kind of know that the injury that you sustained is so bad that you're going to have to retire.
Yeah, that's it. They give you a few months, so I sort of knew I would be exiting. But to also add to the pressure, I left then in May 2011, and to add to the pressure, my wife Alana was at 8 months pregnant. So not only did I have that worry of, how do I fit within the society? It's almost like an identity crisis. I've seen a lot of parallels between special forces and professional sports people, that you've spent your career. So at this point, I'd done 16 years in the military from the age of 17. You spent your career building yourself up to be the best you can be within that unit. And all of a sudden, this curveball changes everything. Your friends have all gone off to Afghanistan, and you're now going another direction into the civilian sector. And how do I now fit in society? What is my role? What is my purpose? I've gone from working in a tight-knit team, having a role, a purpose, know what we're doing day in, day out, and trusting those around me, to being able to start all over again. So that's a real worry for some guys and girls when they leave. But thankfully for me, Alana is very entrepreneurial. And she set up my first private security company on her phone, watching EastEnders, I think, on a Sunday. But within 48 hours of leaving, I got a phone call. I was asked if I could help set up the DFID project. It was DFID's first ever project in Libya. And this is 2011 now, the Arab Spring. So I flew out to Libya and helped set up that project. But I soon identified, chatting to the Libyans, that they didn't want Libya being another Afghanistan and Iraq. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they wanted to take control of the country. And also started to chat to some of the largest security companies, and found out that they were offering, charging six-figure sums to oil and gas and NGOs for crisis management and evacuation plans, when in fact none of these were actually in place. So I was also trying to find a niche at this time. How will I excel within this industry? So I flew home 2 weeks later. Alana gave birth to our daughter Molly, and I said, "Look, can I take the life savings out of the bank? I've got a plan." She said, "Yeah, of course." So I went back into Libya, and I bought, because at this point there was a huge proliferation of weapons in and around Libya. It wasn't hard to get hold of. So I bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt for the next month. And I just made my own case reports, evacuation plans, and wrote them up and sold them to some of the oil and gas sector, hopefully never needing to use it. And in 2012, I just finished at London with the Olympics, and I was in Benghazi. And it was September 11th, 2012, when the American ambassador got killed. I think they went on to make a movie called 13 Hours or something.
Yeah.
And
I've seen it.
I don't know whether it was right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, but I was in the city that evening. I was asked if I could assist and get 8 German oil engineers from a KCA Deutag back to Tripoli. So I took him back through safe houses that I had along the desert. And because of the success of that, 2 years later, I then got a phone call. It was the Tripoli War at this point. So I was in Brazil covering the World Cup. And the Tripoli War was a civil war, which is still ongoing at the moment between the militias and the government. That's where they stopped exporting all the oil from Libya at this point. And the Canadian embassy was stuck. And I then got a phone call, can I assist? So I flew back in from Brazil, and I helped assist them, did the planning for them. I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Libya back to Tunis. It sounds very sexy and sounds very Hollywood, but actually what the success of this was at understanding the demographics, the tribal influences, the politics as well within the country. And I think that's where a lot of security companies get it wrong, is they think they have the money and they have the equipment, but it's understanding people and communication. So the week before I took the Canadians out, the British embassy had driven out and were getting shot at the majority of the checkpoints, which obviously spooked the Canadians. So I went out to those areas and actually spoke to the tribal leaders in the area and just made them aware of our intention. Yes, had to palm a couple of hands with dollars, but that's pretty much the majority of Africa. But it was actually that communication, letting them know that we were no threat. And yeah, we got home successfully.
You talk about those operations in your book, and it's super interesting to read about what you did, and and incredible, and I guess I can't imagine that if you hadn't had the training that you'd had in the military, particularly at the highest level of the military, how difficult it would have been to have managed that. I mean, the pressure would just be absolutely immense. Your ability to deal with pressure must be kind of unprecedented.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's a bit like fear, is how you manage that pressure. I was confident in the plan. I knew the route. I looked at secondary and tertiary options. So I think, I was comfortable. I did feel for the Canadians because they'd never left Tripoli, so they didn't know what the road looked like. So I was comfortable in that. And yes, there's a lot of experiences I've taken from the military, and sort of taken those experiences and sort of learned from them as well. It's always about learning and evolving. That's one of the reasons the UK Special Forces is the best in the world. It's not because we're the best at everything. It's because we're always learning from our mistakes. Now, when we used to come off the ground, before we even go clean our weapon, get showered, anything else, we would have what was known as a hot debrief. And the 3 main questions are, what worked, what didn't work, and if you're going to do it again, what would you do differently? So we'd learn from that and make sure we don't make those mistakes again. So it's those sort of experiences I had, which I put into evacuating these embassies. And for me, it was quite comfortable. And I think you also need to be quite calm as well in front of them. I talk about positivity is contagious, but also fear is contagious. If they see fear in you, then it's not going to help them.
There's a lot of people who come out of the military, and particularly from special forces who've dealt with some very high pressure situations, who do struggle, do they, with mental health problems? Or is that something that you can manage because of the training that you've had?
I think everyone's different. I'm seeing certain trends. When people come out, and it can either be quite smooth or can be quite turbulent. I'm tending to find that those who are struggling, it's not really from things that they've done or experienced before. It's they may be getting divorced at the time, it's having to start all over again. It's almost like an accumulation of little things. 1 or 2 things they can handle, but when you get a few more accumulated, that's when it seems to be cracks are forming. So I've noticed that those that are struggling, I tend to look at their support network around them. They may be getting divorced at the time or whatever. And you also got to be conscious that their wives as well have been with them for the last 22 years as well. They're having to start all over again. So, and I did see a study actually that post-traumatic stress in the military, 75% of post-traumatic stress in the military has got nothing to do with the military. It's all to do with their childhood. It's just triggers of what they've seen in the military, which is why some of these mental health campaigns are great, because they're trying to target the younger children. So But I think everyone is different. Especially when I was in the SBS, you tend to find there was a certain squadron which tend to have a lot of guys that were suffering from PTSD, but maybe they had seen certain things on operations. But everyone's unique. I think everyone suffers with mental health. It's just how your coping mechanisms, how you deal with it. You know, do you have a good support network around you? And I talk about physical activity and things like that, because that's one of the things you miss in the military. The military's got, you know, you didn't have to pay for gym membership for 22 years. And all of a sudden,
everything's there.
Yeah, and you're being told to train as well. You had to train because you're being told. And then when you leave, a lot of them tend to be like, well, I'm not training anymore because, you know, I don't have to anymore and I don't want to be paying for it. But then you tend to see, you know, cracks forming then. So it's almost, trying to manage that, that wellness, you know, that well-being. And I think it's, I think I do, you know, I was very fortunate when I left and now we have social media. I do worry about, you know, what it was like for my father and my grandfather, because you've gone from being in that, you know, that environment to all of a sudden not being able to communicate anymore. You just go off and have a second life. So the main key areas really are physical activity and communication. If you stay on top of that, you should be able to manage it.
Yeah, physical activities obviously super important for mental well-being. So then you've set up your private security business. You've obviously been very successful there. It sounds like you've been in some pretty kind of hairy situations there. And again, you know, it's really well documented in your book. And then what happens? Then I think Alana says, look, enough's enough. You're a dad now. You know, you can't keep putting yourself in harm's way like this. You need to think about us. You need to think about the family. And that's when you stop doing the private security and you start working with Alana, right? Start you know, work as a businessman.
Yeah, well, I came back from that trip with the Canadian Embassy, and what I would normally do is I call it recock. I would deservice and reservice. I'd wash my clothes and get it ironed and then repack. So should they have a phone call, I'm ready to go. And one of my shirts was covered in blood because I was administering first aid at the border of Tunis to Libya. There was an RTA. And it was almost a throwaway comment to my wife. I said, oh, can we get the blood out of my shirt? She goes, yes, we can. I'm more concerned in how the blood was there. And I told her that I'd just evacuated the Canadian Embassy. And she said, have you heard yourself? It's almost like a throwaway comment. That is huge what you've just done. So we sat down that evening and, you know, a couple of bottles of wine and a bottle of port. And we'd actually, you know, there's a few tears as well that evening because I then realized that I was trying to match that adrenaline rush that I had when I was still in the Special Forces. This is 5 years on now from when I'd left. Without actually coming to terms with the fact that I'd left, I'm no longer in that environment. You know, things could have easily gone wrong. And so I didn't need to be taking those risks. And so my wife's a property developer, and she said, look, you know, stay with us. I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And so I did that, and I think my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. So we lived at 8 miles outside Aberdeen, so I'd cycle. I just bought a push bike off Amazon, and I cycled to and from the office. But instantaneously, just being active, I felt a lot better. But you can imagine with my backstory, you know, sat in these architects and planners meetings, I wasn't really interested in the heating system or the plumbing system of the building. It was more the coffee and the biscuits. And Alana could see that glaze over my eyes. But she said, look, you need to do something to keep yourself physically and mentally engaged. I'm not saying go back out, you know, to the desert and bury weapons. So it was about a month before my 40th birthday. And I've always fancied doing a world record. And I said, well, look, I've always wanted to do a world record. And she said, well, what would you like to do it in? I said, well, cycling. Cycling doesn't seem to hinder my knee. It's not causing me any problems. So I'd still only cycled 20 miles. And I was thinking maybe Aberdeen to Dundee and reverse, you know, depending on the wind. But my wife then found the Pan American Highway, the world's longest motorable road. So I always say that she clearly wanted me out of the house at this point. And so I did. I applied for the world record, still haven't only cycled 20 miles. And Guinness came back 6 weeks later and said, yes, you've been successful on your application. So I now had the challenge. I do a lot of work with the charity, a lot of the military charities, the British Legion, the Special Boat Service Association. And, you know, no doubt you know, I'm good friends with the Duke of Sussex. So him and I have done some stuff together before. He's been a guest at my table on some of my events. And so he was my first port of call when Guinness had come back. And so I told him of what my intentions were. And this was 2016. So his brother and Kate were just about to launch the Heads Together campaign, which is about mental health. And I was aware of mental health within the military. You know, I'd seen it firsthand with some of my friends. But once we sat down and explained about how big it was throughout the whole of society, I was just taken back. I wasn't aware how big an issue this was. You know, from young children, teenagers, postnatal depression to, you know, fully grown men. So I thought, perfect. Well, that's the campaign we'll do it for. So that's what we decided to do. So Harry then introduced me to the Royal Foundation. I sat down with them and we talked about how much I was going to raise. I pulled a figure out of the sky, £1 million, because I wanted to keep their attention. Yeah, big figure. Yeah, you know, go big. But then the next question was, you know, what is the message you're trying to promote? And I said, well, you know, physical activity helps your mental state. And I was then told, no, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? They said, because it's not been scientifically proven. I said, yeah, well, that's fine, but I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm training. So I ignored them anyway and carried on using that message. And actually, 3 years on, it is now recognized as one of the coping mechanisms. So yeah, that was the start of the Pan American Highway campaign.
And so how did you prepare for that? Because I mean, how long did it take you? I mean, it's a massive undertaking in terms of the preparation. In terms of, I think I was listening to a podcast with Rich Roll, and there was a guy who had run a marathon in every country in the world, and he was just saying how complicated it was to get the visas and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I mean, logistically, I mean, obviously military background that you've got would help you to kind of organize stuff like that, but it must have been a huge kind of operation to organize.
Yeah, it was. And that's what I did. I just took everything I'd known from my time in the special forces and the private security and just dropped into this challenge. Not taking anything away from the endurance feat, but there's a lot of the planning that was important for this. So I just took a military set of orders, dropped it on this, and just crossed out ammunition. And then as I started evolving as a cyclist, I then introduced that into the plan. But I talked about it before, about the hot debrief, the three main questions. So I started buying magazines, reading literature, going to some of these bike shows and understanding a bit more about cycling. But I thought the best people to speak to are those that have done it before you, because you won't get that from a book or a magazine. So I spoke to the previous record holders. The world record at this point was 117 days. Oh, sorry, when I applied for the world record, it was 117 days. 6 weeks later, it was it'd already been beaten. So I spoke to the record holders, and they'd all gone from north to south, started in Prudhoe Bay in Alaska and finished in Argentina. But all their issues were in South America and Central America, the highest mountains, the hottest deserts. So I thought, well, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why not address those issues early and get them out of the way? And then when we get to North America, we can either adjust the mileage accordingly. So that was my thought process. I wasn't actually scared to change the plan of what everyone else had done. That may have worked for them, but I decided I was going to go reverse. Cycling wise, I got a local coach here. I decided to go do Land's End John O'Groats, having only cycled for 3 weeks. And people kept saying to me, you need to know about cadence, you need to be bike fit. And I thought, I thought bike fit was your actual fitness, not your actual measurements to your bike. So I did it all completely wrong. Fractured my scaphoid in Somerset. We had two days of Storm Angus in the southwest. In Scotland, it was -16. I did it in the middle of November. But for me, the Pan American Highway is 15 Land's End John O'Groats back to back. If I couldn't do one, how was I going to do 15? But then 6 months later, I did reverse. Harry asked if I would cycle with some of the members of the Endeavour Fund, which is the military element of the Royal Foundation. And so for me, that was a recce ride. I mean, 6 months later, I knew I was now more bike fit. I knew about cadence, and it sounds arrogant. I don't mean it to sound arrogant, because I know Land's End John O'Groats is a lot of people's bucket list, but it was a training ride, and that's how I had to approach it.
That's quite some training ride, blimey. I mean, particularly as you hadn't done much cycling. So then you'd done all your preparation. You'd you'd started raising money. I mean, how easy a process was that? Were you talking predominantly to kind of corporates about sponsoring you?
Yeah, that was it. We do a lot with the SPSA. We have a big event in London, and in one evening they make a huge amount of money. So I sort of took what I'd seen there. If you get the right people in the room and the right messaging, then you can get some good money there. So the difficulty I had as being a non-cyclist, you can imagine trying to find sponsorship. I was going down to London and visit some of these big companies and explaining, right, I've never cycled before. I'm going to cycle the world's longest road, break 2 world records, and raise £1 million for mental health. I think a lot of them thought I had mental health problems myself. But this is now 2017. So the Heads Together campaign had launched at the London Marathon. It was very much the topic of conversation. Everyone was talking about it. A lot of the corporates wanted to get involved with their CSR. So I think the success of me getting sponsorship was the right time and the right messaging. And thankfully, I got introduced to St. James's Place Wealth Management, and they were looking to get involved with mental health, and told them about my challenge, and they got behind me. So I was very fortunate in that aspect.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So then you go over to, you started the challenge in South America, obviously.
Yeah, I started in Argentina. Yeah.
And how? I mean, how did it go initially? I mean, how did you kind of just have to get into the groove, get into a mindset? I mean, how challenging was it?
I think now looking back, the hardest thing is getting to the start point. You speak to a lot of adventurers. If you get to the start point, you're almost there. You're 80% there. I remember we did the launch night the week that I was setting off, and everyone was saying, "Oh, this is great. It's your launch night." For me, it's already probably about 18 months planning up to that point. I'm now approaching the final stage. So when I was at that start point, I was ready to go. I knew there was going to be challenges, but I didn't expect challenges from the start. We get quite a lot of strong winds here in Scotland, but as I set off from Patagonia, I had 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds for the first week. And on the second day, my good leg, my good knee was giving me pain. And you can imagine mentally what's going through your head. You've got a 100+ day challenge and already you're in pain. So we sent a video back to some analysts back in the UK, and because of the strong winds, I was cycling at a 45-degree angle to keep the bike straight. It was actually the torsion in the knee that was causing pain. But a week later, when the winds had subsided, then the pain had subsided. But what I've sort of learned from that challenge, and also my time in the military, is you don't start, for example, the UK Special Forces course is 6 months long. You don't start that course 100% fit at day one, because you'll burn out by week 2 or 3. You go on there 75, 80% fit, carrying a bit of weight. And then as you start progressing, you get fitter. The first few days are going to be hard. And that was very similar to this challenge. It doesn't matter how fit you are, whether you're at your peak or below. The first 10 days are always going to be hard while your body starts adapting.
Can you tell us any kind of stories that the kind of experiences that you had on the route all the way through? I mean, what was the kind of most challenging part of it?
For me, was probably the first part in Patagonia. The second was, I here was managing egos. I had a team around me at the start who weren't there at the end. We had to start dealing with niff, naff, and trivia. It was nothing to do with the challenge. That's what caught me out. The actual cycling was quite easy in the end. But, I did it in 99 days, but I only really remember 10 days because I was very objective driven. I was going for numbers. And things that stand out for me, Cartagena, breaking the first world record was amazing. Crossing into Chile from Argentina, because you knew you ticked off your first country. But for me, it's just, the scenery, the cultures, the wildlife, from the llamas and the emus down in Patagonia to the iguanas and the grizzly bears.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been incredible way to kind of see all those countries. I mean, you'd never get to see countries in that way any other way, would you? I mean,
not from the road level as well. And actually, the difference in the climate as well. So I cycled through the Atacama Desert, which is the driest non-popular desert in the world. So it was plus 47 degrees. And then when I finished in Prudhoe Bay, it was minus 18. So you literally was ticking off all environments a long way. In Central America, we had 100% humidity as well, which was probably most difficult of cycling, trying to stay on top of your fluids. But yeah, I was losing weight throughout the whole process.
Blimey. And how does it work with the Guinness Book of Records? Because presumably they're having to monitor kind of what you're doing. Are you wearing like Garmin's and all that kind of stuff so that you're collecting that data?
Yeah, so Guinness, when you apply for World Record, they give you a set of guidelines, and there's actually so much information you've got to give them. And so for me, you need to give them a computer data, but I wasn't comfortable in case my bike computer, my Garmin, didn't work. So I then backed it up on a Garmin watch. So I had 2 lots of data as well. And I used to hear horror stories as well that people would, when I'd finish for the day, that's my start point for the next day, but I wouldn't go to that exact start point. I would then dress back 100 meters because sometimes the satellite crossovers aren't exact. And I've heard of people, not getting their records because of that. So that's the computer data which you need. You then need to send every time I stopped on the bike, I had to do a video diary, mark a waypoint where I was. That's the start of the day, the end of the day, and every time I had to stop for food. You had a witness book, you had a log book. We wanted to make sure that we had the records. So we paid for adjudicator to be there in South America and at the end. So, when I was in the countries in South America, I'd send the data over to Alana, my PA, each week, and they'd then send it on to Guinness. But as we got closer to Cartagena and to Prudhoe Bay, we'd be sending it daily so that when we got there, they could say, right, yes, you now have the world record.
So you got to the end of it. I mean, what did that feel like? I mean, that's such a huge achievement. I mean, I guess unlike anything else that you've done to that point, or did it feel like another kind of operation?
It's very surreal. And sort of going back, I took 10 days off the South America record. The world record was 117 days and I was aiming for 110. It's not because I wanted to smash it by a week. It's because, when I was doing my planning, I could, plan certain scenarios, but if there's situations out of my control, be it natural disasters, coups in countries, third party influence, it wasn't eating into my record time. It was eating into that week fudge. So that was my target, was 110 days. I got to North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead and I thought, perfect. I've got a couple of days rest if I need, we're well on target. And my wife then rang me and said that we'd be kindly invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which just changed the dynamics completely of this challenge. So for me to get back in time, I had to be home day 102. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now 1 day behind. So having to deal with that mentally as well. Yes, it's nice to be invited to such a prestigious event, but I just had my legs taken from me. All that hard work I'd done for the first 70 days meant nothing. And we now had a new objective. But fortunately, I was now in North America and all security issues in South America, we would cycle from first light to last light and stay off the roads in the evening. I had the luxury of being able to cycle at night. And so that's what I did in North America. I just cycled as often as I could. And the following day, I got to Lubbock in Texas and we had 60 mile an hour winds and tornadoes. So I was now stuck another 24 hours. So I'm now 2 days behind my new target. And to get out of there, I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to miss the next weather window. So there's an app on your phone called Windy TV, which is quite popular with sailors. It gives you the strength and directions of the wind forecasted every hour for the next 2 weeks. And that's what I did with North America. I just played chess with Mother Nature through the gaps in the wind. And we had 17 days planned. And I did it in 11 and a half days. And then I got a week. Yeah, I got a week outside in a town called Whitehorse. And I thought, the world record's secure unless I get eaten by a grizzly. And I'm getting back for this wedding. It then came out on social media that a professional cyclist, because I still like to class myself as a novice, had come out that day and said that he was going to cycle the Pan American Highway in August and be the first man to do it under 100 days. And he's got 3 other endurance records, sponsored by Red Bull, all the big brands. So I thought, great. So the dynamics again had changed on this. So I had to cycle for 22 hours in the last 30 hours of minus 18 to make sure that I became the first person in history to do it under the 100 days. So for me, the original, where we are from the original plan, 117 days to now sub 100. you have your start point and objective, which I mentioned before. It's just being able to react to the situation on the ground. And, thankfully for me, I was in a situation when I found out about the wedding, when I found out about the other cyclists, that I could act on it. I sometimes wonder if I'd known about that at the start, would it have been too much? You just don't know.
Too overwhelming.
Too overwhelming.
Well, congratulations again, mate. I mean, what a phenomenal achievement. I mean, something that, very few people on this planet would be able to achieve. So yeah, you must be incredibly proud of having done that, and also for having raised all that money for mental health charities. I mean, that's just an awesome thing to have done. So you finished it. Huge relief, I bet. You went back and you went to the wedding. I guess you went to the wedding almost straight off the plane.
I did. I landed on the 17th. I landed on the 17th, and I think the wedding was the 19th, if I'm right in saying. Yeah, I landed on the 17th, and I had numerous interviews that day and the next day, and it was straight to the wedding. So, I'd lost 12 kilos. I was half the person I looked like at the beginning of the challenge. But for me, it was almost too close to the challenge. I hadn't really come to terms with being around my family yet. I was still coming to terms with that, spending time with them, to all of a sudden being in the Wilds press. So I hadn't really had time to absorb or take on board what I'd achieved before then on to the next high. You hear about these sort of sports personalities. Everyone said you'll go into a depression. You spent years training. For example, the Olympics. You spent 4 years training for the Olympics. You do the event, and then once you come back and that's it over, you sort of go into a depression. But I'd gone from having 2 highs in 1 week to then a massive depression when I got back.
Because of the type of character that you are. And again, this is why I think business people can kind of relate in part. I mean, obviously what you've done is kind of far beyond what most business people have ever done. But I mean, for me personally, if I haven't got stuff to do, that makes me anxious, and it must be exactly the same thing. I mean, particularly having done something so extreme and such an accomplishment, you must then be thinking, shit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? You must be kind of chomping at the bit to do something else. So that's when I guess you start planning this next challenge.
That's it. Yeah. The first 2 questions I got when I got back in order was, first one was, how was the wedding? Generally, that was the first question. And then the second one, what is next? So my USP, it separates me from others in this sort of environment, the adventure explorer, is I like to take a sport or discipline I've never done before and find the biggest challenge. So I've enjoyed cycling. I've cycled the world's longest road. So my next one is to kayak the River Nile from source to sea, which has never been done before. I talk about my sponsored marketing team, talk about the SWOT analysis, about my arrogance towards the cycling community. The kayaking community will probably feel the same soon. But I think it's good that, I've spoken to a couple of endurance cyclists, and they really struggle finding the next challenge because they just focus on that one sport, whereas I'm quite comfortable that I can just take everything I've learned and just put into another discipline. I'm also trying to promote to people that it's never too late to start a sport, but also be good at it.
So this next challenge, when's it going to happen, and what are you raising money for, and how's it all going?
Yeah, so the next challenge is supposed to be this year, and we originally were going to do it for modern slavery and human trafficking. I'm now chatting with a documentary team who want to do a 6-episode documentary. What you tend to have, though, with broadcasters, they don't like to focus on a specific charity or campaign, but the luxury we have there is when we do the challenge is we can talk about everything. Rather than just modern slavery, human trafficking, we can talk about pollution, poverty. So that was the plan this year, and obviously the situation we're in at the moment with the coronavirus, that's put everything on hold. For me, it'll be interesting to see what happens when we come out, because there's not much information coming back from Africa at the moment. We don't know how far behind they're going to be behind us. I think I saw a statistic last week. There's only 4 cases of coronavirus, so there's clearly some communication issues there. So I will do it. So whether it's this year or next year will all depend on where we are when we come out of here. But I'm also doing an ambassador for the British Legion. Next year it's their centenary, the British Legion. So I said I'll do a little challenge for them. It won't be a huge endurance one. It'll be a nice short 2-week one to raise funds for them.
I think we're just gonna try and get in a couple of questions now, if that's all right, from
Yeah.
from the network. So so we've got one here from Dr. Snay. How do you take the best principles that you have learned in the military and apply them to corporate life? Because I guess, you are in a sense kind of, a business person in that you have projects that you have to run. I mean, what are the kind of core principles that you think, or the core learnings that you've taken from the military that really apply to being successful in corporate life?
I think obviously planning, having a plan as well. For me, it's that meticulous sort of planning. But I've also then contradict that in the fact that you have a plan, but it never goes to plan. It's being reactive. People skills as well. Some of the guys struggle when they get out of the military. In fact, they'll talk to their team or whatever as if they're still in the military. So you need to sort of get that mindset away that you're no longer in the military. So communication is a key one. Planning. What else? Principles. Belief. I generally believe, be it evacuating the embassy or doing my bike ride, you need to have belief in your plan. If you don't believe it yourself, then none of your team are going to believe it either. So I generally believe that anything is possible. The phrase impossible to me means it just hasn't been done yet. It's just how you approach it. So yeah, they're probably my ones from the military. We're very much the mindset in the military. We get told improvise, adapt, and overcome. We're always going to have scenarios or situations. It's just how you get around them and still achieve that objective. So I think that'd be quite good for the corporate sector.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I can definitely see how important that would be and how that relates to corporate life. And then one last question. You're good friends with Prince Harry.
Yeah.
What is he like? Because I think the British public, thought they knew him, really loved him, loved his personality, and he's obviously a hugely kind of charismatic and fun guy. And I think just generally people love that fun that he had. And now the kind of tide has turned. I mean, since he's got married, I think people see him in a different light. I mean, what is he like, and what do you think went wrong in terms of his kind of public perception, and how is that going to come back in? Because he has done some amazing things. Obviously he served our country in the military, which is that's incredible just in itself. But in terms of all the money that he's raised for charities and all the awareness that he's brought to kind of certain issues.
Well, I think I met Harry 13 years ago, and from the moment I met him, I had my reservations, and then him and I got partnered off for the 6 weeks, and he actually is, down to earth. He's very astute. He's very level-headed as well. There's no arrogance with him as well. He makes you feel comfortable. I remember doing my promo video with him at Kensington Palace, and before we'd even started filming, he went round and spoke to each and every member of that filming team, so they all felt at ease. So he has that natural warmth, which I probably gets from his mother. But even in the military, when I knew him in the military, he always talked about starting his own family. I know when his brother had his family, you could see that Harry, was really keen to, start his own family as well. And you've seen the way he is in Africa with some of the kids. That's probably where he's most comfortable in those environments. He was born into this world. He doesn't really like being in the spotlight, doesn't like public speaking as well. But I think what's happened over the last 2 years is his personal circumstances have changed. He now is a father. He now is a husband and a young father. So his priorities have changed. He obviously now with William and his young children, that Harry's now like sixth in line. So he has a totally different path from that of his brother. I've done a lot of interviews on TV and radio talking about the positives of them stepping back. Now, the first one is the priorities. I think you mentioned in October last year, you could see history repeating itself, with his mother. So that's obviously got to be something that he's concerned about. But, having worked with the likes of the Royal Foundation as well, there's a lot of red tape and protocol because you're dealing with those royal family members. actually his and Megan's love is philanthropy. So actually finding someone who has a passion that you enjoy as well is quite rare. You know, me and Alana, we're very similar people. We've got the same sort of passions, and I see that with him and Megan. And but they can actually do a lot more being away from the royal family. If you take away all that red tape and protocol, and you know the corporates have more exposure to them, and then they can actually do a lot more work. But also Megan's, you know, everyone blames Megan because she's the last one to arrive. And I always laugh when I say, well, Harry's been in love with before. You know, he's met other girls. Obviously, you can't dictate who you fall in love with. He's fallen in love with this girl, but she's obviously come from, you know, humble beginnings as well. You know, lived on her own, had to start from nothing as well. So she's probably opened his eyes that there is another world out there. And I think, you know, when you start adding all that up, you know, protecting the family as well, it probably looked like a good option for him. But
yeah, no, I mean, I can see that, like, kind of priorities thing. Just, I mean, I know as a father myself, you know, your priorities change when you have kids and you get married. Yeah, absolutely, big time. So yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's the most kind of eloquent way that anyone's kind of described to me how you know why things have changed. But it is, you know, it's absolutely those priorities.
And you've touched on it as well. You know, certain media, and I only mention a certain, you know, but bad media. There's only a small amount. A lot of it's very good. But there's those that, you know, really target them. But you know, you talk about the military side. You know, other than probably his grandfather Philip, you know, he's probably done more for the military. But after he's left the military,
100%,
veteran environment, he's done so much. It's just that I just think people don't like change. They're not used to it, and they're not used to someone, you know, going off to the other side of the world. But he's chosen to do that, and you know, he's still going to be a national treasure. You know, that's the elephant in the room here. You know, that he's still going to be under the spotlight. It's just what, you know, he's criticised. He's damned if he does, and damned if he doesn't. So just go and do what makes you happy, and still get criticised. That's the way I say it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. So one final question is, you know, and this kind of relates to where we're at the moment in this kind of pandemic, in this crisis that the whole world's in, which is just so weird, isn't it? Because it's like everybody on the planet is touched by this. I mean, none of us have ever experienced anything like that. I mean, it is stressful. How do you deal with stress? I mean, do you ever feel stress? Is it just that you just never get stressed, or do you get stressed and you've just kind of developed tools or been taught tools to deal with it?
Yeah, I think it's coping mechanisms. Everyone has stress. It's how you deal with it. This is you know, I don't know, we're probably in the world's largest psychological experiment. You know what I mean? The difference between here, because I've had questions before, is this like being in the special forces? I said no, because my wife and kids were with me on operations. So yeah, I think the thing is that what we should take away is that we're all in it together. You don't feel like you're being, you know, victimized, you know, it's harder on you than others. So for me, it's just trying to maintain that routine and structure. You know, we get up every day, we still make our beds, we live like normal lives, but everything's, you know, any sort of communication done by this. So routine's a key one. Physical activity is key for this as well. You know, it's very easy to just stay in your pajamas all day and things like that and get quite lazy, but you need to get out and be physically active. You know, even if, you know, we live in a penthouse apartment, we have no garden. We literally just moved a month ago from a lovely house with a garden to like nothing. But you can still be physically active in there. You know, we've got Post-it notes around the house at various points in the house. So every time you walk by, you have to do 5 star jumps or 5 burpees and things like that. So subconsciously, you're keeping active, and the kids love that anyway. You know, there'll be points in the house that you actually avoid. You know, so yeah, no, don't go over there. There's burpees over there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, that's a great idea.
Also having a plan. You know, actually, me and my wife are getting a lot done during this period. It's just making the most of this time. There's a lot of positives during this time. I think, you know, going back to the basics of baking, spending time with the family. I don't think me and my wife and kids have all been through as many walks as we have in these last 4 weeks. But also on the other side, the positives of communication. You know, by Zoom and Skype and things like that. I'm hoping that, you know, once we're out of there, people will continue using this and realize, actually, I don't need to travel to such and such and, you know, waste hours or days. That I can get everything done from here, and actually then use that time that you saved either with your family or doing physical activity. But I think you need to have routine. You need to have an objective, you know, make a plan for either that week. So we have weekly goals and we have goals for the end of the quarantine.
No, that's really useful, mate. I really appreciate that. And one very last question, because you've obviously had to deal with isolation when you've been on operations, or I mean, particularly obviously when you did the Pan American Highway Challenge, and a lot of people are kind of, you know, a lot of people now are obviously dealing with isolation. How do you deal with isolation? What kind of tips can you give to the rest of us who are perhaps experiencing it for the first time?
I think, you know, the key one is keeping active. Keep active. Have a routine. It's very difficult, you know, because when we were in the military, we were there for a purpose. We were there on a mission, so we were keeping busy in that aspect. So my main one really is physical activity, and also try and find the balance between, and I'm probably the worst person to talk about this, Ascalana, between business and family. You know, I think we've been blessed with an opportunity here to spend as much time with our family as we want. So, you know, take advantage of it, because fast forward in a couple of months, we'll wish we were back in this position. So probably embrace it is what I would say.
Yeah, no, great. Very, very good advice. Dean, thank you so much, mate. That was awesome. I think everybody's gonna really enjoy listening to your story. And again, if anybody hasn't read Dean's book, Relentless, you can obviously get it on Amazon. There'll be a link or something, I'm sure, on this podcast. So thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Stay safe, and thank you, Cam Talks, for producing this episode of Dorian Conversation.